Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, coming to you from Mooloolaba on Gubbi Gubbi country. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today, I'll be speaking with Peter Gillogley, who's a counselling psychologist in Brisbane, Australia, working in both private practice and outpatient settings. Peter currently delivers a CFT day program in a private mental health clinic. He has a lot of experience now running CFT in groups. Peter also enjoys weaving compassion into his private work, including trauma-focused IFS interventions, EMDR resourcing, as well as parts work with clients who hear voices and clients that experience dissociative disorders. Peter is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to delivering compassion-focused therapy in groups. And so I bring you Peter Gillogley. Does that sound all right?
Sounds good.
We may as well get started. I mean, it is great to get to chat. I mean, we caught up at the workshop, and you were telling us about the wonderful work you're doing with CFT in groups and so on. I really felt excited at the idea of chatting to you about that because, there's, even if we think the world over, there are some key places where CFT really is being, rolled out in groups and so on, but not many, there's so you kind of really at the cutting edge there, mate, and sort of, probably have a lot to offer us, I think, in terms of the wisdom of how to roll this stuff out and how to do CFT in groups and work with the group dynamics and various other bits. So thank you for coming on to what I sometimes like to call compassion in a T-shirt.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. But let's go back in time a little bit and sort of hear, like, you're a psychologist. What's the story there? How did you get into psychology, I guess, in the first place, and so on?
I'm sort of actually a late arrival to psychology in many ways. So started a study about 10 years ago, and I've been registered or a counselling psychologist now for the last 4 or 5 years, give or take.
Okay.
But I guess right from when I was young, I kind of was really inspired by initially crisis work. So like Hayley that you interviewed before, I had a kind of long 20 years in Lifeline doing volunteer crisis counselling. So that for many years was my kind of way that I had work, and kind of this sort of, well, I guess from the, sort of the early days, really compassion for others who were kind of in crisis. So that was something I really enjoyed. But at some stage, crisis work is 20 minutes. You're with someone and you never see them again. And I really wanted to be involved in the process, have a bit more skin in the game, so to speak, and to be there on the journey more so with people. So that was really what motivated me to kind of get involved in this more full-time.
May I ask what you did do before psychology? What was your career then?
So IT. So I did computer science in the 80s. I worked for sort of corporate companies, so IBM and those sorts of things. But I sort of ended up really in healthcare, and particularly building what are now the statewide electronic healthcare systems for the state government and also nationally. So I was involved in standards. I don't know, I was embedded, all of that stuff.
Is there a kind of a similarity crossover there, the idea of the systems in IT and the kind of the formulations, the kind of creating a sense of the systems for human beings? I mean, what would you say about that, just as a matter of interest?
Well, I guess where I kept finding myself, that the technology piece, and to some degree I think also therapies, that technology in therapies is reasonably straightforward and reasonably easy to kind of master, but it's this interface between others and using those skills that's hard. And I found myself sort of in the equivalent sort of zone of there was the computer technology and the outcomes that people wanted, and I kept finding myself in the middle there, kind of as a kind of United Nations, if you like, trying to get things working. So yeah, I think it's that boundary between people and skills and approaches and evidence-based kind of knowledge and so on. Just getting that to work in practice is the hard bit.
It's very, very, very cool. I mean, in many ways, IT really boils down to human behavior in a sense, doesn't it? Because you're trying to kind of think, how do I work all this bit out so that those tricky humans can actually, interact with it, and which brings us to the tricky brain. I mean, what sort of then? So you went into the psychology thing, counselling first of all, crisis counselling, into the psychology thing. What about becoming more interested in compassion and maybe even CFT? What brought you to CFT?
I guess as I started, I really started perhaps from more the ACT perspective, so psychological flexibility. But I just sort of kept hitting for moments with clients where they were really harsh on themselves and had this really strong inner criticism. And although compassion definitely is in ACT models and other therapies, there wasn't a way to sort of really get at or to people who had this really, really harsh critic who had been around for a long time, and this kind of really ingrained shame and kind of often self-loathing, for example. And I just felt like I needed something a bit more targeted that would really kind of bring this to the fore and give me something to work with. So that was what really led me to Paul's work, to Paul Gilbert's work and compassion-focused therapy, and that kind of the workshop back that we did originally when he came out to Brisbane 4 or 5 years ago now, I think. And then, so that's sort of how that grew.
Yes, the self-criticism and shame. I mean, that's the thing that really, well, Paul, a lot of Paul's sort of earlier research was specifically around shame, wasn't it? And his model, his biopsychosocial model of shame, and it just seems to be this kind of ubiquitous, transdiagnostic, ever-present phenomenon, I guess, that we're kind of dealing with, and
there's something that sort of classic mindfulness doesn't touch when we're dealing with that, that those really powerful emotions that are so ingrained. We need something that's very interpersonal and very human, right? To be with people in those moments and give them kind of, I guess, once they sort of, I guess, the experience of what it would be like to have self-compassion for themselves, which may not be something they've kind of experienced before, and then a way to kind of build on that, the skills and approach to kind of go somewhere with that.
What does that shift look like for you, do you think? Or what have you noticed in some of your clients or people you're working with? Can you give us a little flavor of, when someone is so self-critical, has that long history of self-criticism, self-loathing, as you said, what are the first glimpses maybe, or what's that look like when people start to become self-compassionate or start to experiment a bit with that or move in that direction? Any thoughts there?
I guess, people have different paths to this, but I guess there is sort of I've observed a bit of a classic pattern, and particularly in groups is kind of where I notice this the most. They'll arrive to group and really have often no idea what compassion really is, and come with the usual myths and misunderstandings of it, that it's weakness or that it's going to kind of rob me of motivation and so on, and so there's that sort of education piece. But I guess the first telling moment is your own modeling compassion for others. So when they see that you've got it, right, and you can be self-compassionate, and they, in a group, they witness other group members being compassionate to each other and to themselves, they sort of think, I'd like some of that. And that's kind of a first shift. And then at some stage, it's often quite later, that first felt kind of, it's almost sort of somatic, body-based feeling of compassion for themselves. So often easy to do compassion for others. When they get that first glimpse of feeling it, right, it's magic. And if you pause and get them to notice that can be life-changing.
Yeah, the first bit's great. I interviewed our friend James Kirby about his book recently, and he made the point there, I think it was, that we're humans very much sort of are copiers. We copy, imitate, I think actually he probably said, each other. And so there's a real role for that, I guess, isn't there, of the therapist kind of demonstrating, modeling this thing, and then people can sometimes be just a bit tempted to copy that or to imitate compassion. And
Yes.
the one of the greatest ways that we can cultivate compassion around us in others is to model it ourselves. But then the self-compassion starts to sort of creep in later. I must admit, I sometimes feel like one of the first clues that people are moving more in that direction is a harder one, actually. It's almost like a grief that arises for people, a sadness, a sense of, which I think is sometimes a little bit in the sympathy, that this sort of just this little touch point of sympathy for oneself and what oneself has gone through, and then the grief that kind of comes along with that. Do you notice that sort of thing yourself with people?
Definitely, and also the sense of lost years. When they know what's possible, and there is this grief around how long they've been stuck, right, in kind of unhelpfulness, right, and lack of compassion for themselves. So often it's almost sort of the most common thing that happens, that feeling of loss and grief.
I think grief is a big one for us to think about, because of course it's very uncomfortable and painful to actually feel that, and so that can then feed back into the reservations about going there, can't it? Because people feel it's a bit like someone, a lot of behavior change, initially the consequences of that behavior change can be sort of punishing or negative consequences, and so we back away from making the changes. Same sort of thing here. Sometimes those initial consequences can be grief, which is very painful and punishing. You alluded to groups there, and that is something that I think is really, I'd love to tap into your wisdom about that, because you've been running CFT groups for some time now, and what got you into group work, I guess, rather than perhaps, I mean, you might probably also use this individually, but what got you into the groups?
Well, I'm employed by Ramsay Healthcare at New Farm Clinic, and been running a day program there for day programs. So I've run CBT programs and ACT programs, and I was really enjoying the compassion work that I was doing in private practice, and really wanted to bring that to a group setting. And there was sort of, I don't know, a lot of people who have been in and out of, have had sort of recurrent admissions, find it really, there's something about therapies that sort of, it's a little bit like water off a duck's back, it bounces off them. There's a bit of Teflon there. And a kind of universal sense that really somewhere this harsh criticism is part of what's making it hard for them to get well. So, there was a sort of demand, and a ready sort of cohort of people who were really crying out for this kind of thing. So it was something that was wanted, and something that's been popular. It's been a joy.
Do you think there's something about doing it in a group that is kind of particularly wanted or in demand, or is it more just the demand was high, and so therefore this is a way to help more people get through it? What's your feeling about that?
I think CFT in a group is a totally different experience than CFT kind of one-on-one. When you've got a group, you've got sort of people at different stages and different levels and different experiences, but all that lovely common humanity that kind of comes along, and people can bounce off each other. When you get challenged by one group member on a topic or an idea or something, everyone else is listening, right? And there's just those lovely dynamics that happen that are just impossible to create in other settings.
Yeah, there's something about CFT in particular that really lends itself to a group, isn't it? Because we're all about the three flows of compassion, and groups really can give us the opportunity to kind of try all of that out, I suppose. Like being compassionate to other group members, practicing gradually opening ourselves up to receiving it from them all. And then eventually in that camaraderie sort of a way, everyone starts to, kind of move towards self-compassion. And so there's something about the group itself that really, really helps.
And I don't know whether you've noticed this, Stan, in your own groups, but people will do something or do things in a room with others that they won't do outside the room. There'll be a momentum as you go around the group, and it's, it might be looking at it might be shame, for example, if you're working with that, looking at this from a compassionate perspective, and someone will have no idea really, or no willingness to do it. But as you're coming around the group and they're hearing other group members take this sort of compassionate frame on it, by the time it gets to them, they're willing to give it a go, right? There's this sort of momentum, or this, I think we're all sheep in some way, so we like to follow each other. So people will do things, you can see it happening. They'll just do something in a group, in that setting, with that sort of wave of energy that goes around the group, and they'll try something on it, or say something to themselves they've never said before.
With compassion and self-compassion, courage is often the key, isn't it, really?
Yes.
And maybe
there's, and they get courage.
Maybe there's something in that, that the camaraderie again just sort of creates a sense of feeling encouraged to go there, to give it a try, to see what it's like, feeling sort of safe in the context maybe of the common humanity, and we're sort of all going through this a little bit, and the especially the facilitator being able to kind of create that sort of context, and feeling safe and also encouraged in a sense. That's the sweet spot, where people then feel willing and able to give it a go, or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. And there is that safeness that you get from the group, that sense of, I can kind of be my authentic self here with others, and I'm not going to be judged or banished for it.
How do you kind of help create that? Because in some ways, it's also a challenge for a group, isn't it? Because everyone's turning up. There are all these people that they maybe don't know, or don't know very well. Humans are hyper social animals. I mean, we love it in some ways, but we're also hopeless at it in some ways as well. I mean, what do you do there to create that sense of safeness in the group?
It is the kind of the primary task of the person leading the group, and also groups have responsibility for this themselves to create it. So I think you have to bring some sort of level of group awareness, not just from your own facilitation style, but with other group members, that this is something we create each day, that we come. But when it's great, it's great. When you've got it going, and you've got a regular core turning up, and you've got this momentum and a set of kind of expectations of each other, it just happens, right? And it happens effortlessly. But some days it doesn't, and some days some group members can be a bit dysregulated, and that can kind of really set the energy off in the group in other ways. And I guess even on those days, as facilitator, you practice compassion for all of that. So it's how you kind of sit with that distress, and kind of every group experience doesn't have to be perfect. But it's I don't know, it's a little bit, you can't force it. The group has to kind of arrive at that themselves.
Yes, you can. I always like the saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But you can put salt in the oats. You can make the horse thirsty. And it's a bit like that with creating safeness, isn't it? I mean, you can't force it.
Yes.
But there are little ingredients, I suppose, that you can put in, to the sort of the process of it all, that just makes it a bit more likely that people will yeah, that feeling of safeness that can arise. Someone who's leading the group that we feel safe in their hands, or certain things happen. We're watching how that gets kind of managed or resolved, and that helps us to feel confident that we're safe. And so it's a kind of very much an iterative process, feeling that we're creating there.
It is, I guess, to go with your salt and oats analogy.
Yeah.
It is magic when you've got a couple of members in your group who are particularly kind of psychologically aware, and even better, compassionately aware. And just, the use of them, whether you go to them first when you're doing kind of looking for reflections, or if it's getting a bit off track, it just needs a couple of people in your group that can be sort of, they're not you, so they're not facilitating, but they kind of reset kind of where the energy of the group's going. So I definitely rely on them from time to time.
Yeah, the kind of the guided discovery piece, isn't it? And finding ways to, who might it be in the group that might sort of get that ball rolling a little bit. And then once there's a sense there of, okay, that went okay, maybe I can, say something too. Exactly. I remember when I've run groups, I've run groups with veterans, for example, combat veterans and so on. And it's that they've always taught me a lot. And I've found that it is often interesting to sort of see who is is there someone in the group that is a bit more charismatic almost? I'm not sure what the right word is, but and which way do they lean? Like is the more outspoken one, this sucks, I don't like self-pity or something like that. Or are they, this is great, come on guys, we can do this, or whatever. And actually either way, in some ways, you can sort of engage them a little bit, interact with them. Maybe it's working with the fears, blocks and resistances. Maybe it's looking at these facilitators of compassion, and then the rest of the group gradually comes into that conversation, that discussion, and out comes the wisdom of the group, sort of thing, from there.
Yes, I agree.
Who is it that you are working with then? Or like what are some of the presentations maybe, or that sort of thing?
I guess anxiety and trauma would be the two, and depression. So and they all overlap often. So that would probably kind of represent maybe half to 3/4 of my group. In a sort of related overlap as well, it can be whether it's a workplace incident that happened, or a sense of being bullied at work and then kind of hesitant to go back. So that can be another kind of reason why people present. People with kind of struggling with eating, some people with psychosis. I guess people have to be, these sorts of groups, people are reasonably somewhat high functioning, right, in terms of being able to be in a group for a day and kind of work from this perspective. But kind of that sort of population.
Do you ever try to kind of manage the makeup of the group in that sense? Different people, or just the people come and okay. Yeah.
People get referred, and I suppose I just have never refused it. I can't remember refusing anyone to come to the group. Yes. I just, they just have to be well enough to be able to be in a, our group goes, it's a day program, so it goes from 9 till 2:15, which is a pretty long day for people. So it's not everyone can kind of handle that. But that's really it, that people can be in a group and they can kind of last the day.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool, because a lot of the research, I guess, into groups, CFT groups at least, tends to be specific presentations. Certainly any of the stuff I've been involved in. Yeah. I know that Kate Lucra has done a lot of work with quite mixed groups. as well, and including trauma and complex trauma and personality and things like that. So you mentioned there it's sort of like a day 9 till 2:30 or something like that. What is the structure of it all? How does it all kind of like literally roll out?
The beginning, I don't always do it in the same order, but there'll be a soft landing. So some normally a soothing with a breathing type of soft landing. There'll be often a check-in of what people were practicing between the last session and this session. So usually at the end of the day, we'll take whatever that we're working with and invite people to sort of say, well, how might they put that into practice, and what would that look like? And then we can use, people's experiences of that as an opportunity to look at fears, blocks, and resistances, or successes, all that sort of stuff. So often that will happen at the beginning. And then we, really need some sort of check-in. So people often come with distress, and they aren't going to be in a place in the group until they feel like they've been heard, right? So check-in, that whole process runs into a morning tea. So and I'll play with the check-in a bit. So sometimes we'll do check-in in pairs. Sometimes we'll go around the whole group. Sometimes we'll do check-in from a compassion perspective. Sometimes we'll do check-in from a 3 circles perspective. I just tend to mix check-in up a little bit so that people just don't sort of kind of tell the same story and get sort of stuck in a narrative. After morning tea, we usually do some content. So lots of, often my groups can be sort of a dozen people or so. So, might split it up into pairs so people get more talk time rather than it being too didactic. But much of the day is spent then often trying to pair, a time where they've struggled to be compassionate with a skill or an approach or some of the content that we're doing in compassion. And then, as I said, usually the afternoon is kind of finishing that off, and then there's kind of soft landing, right? So that people don't go home dysregulated. And that classic, what's the takeaway from today? And, how do you want to put this into practice? So that would be a typical day.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Stan, by the way, just quickly, and I think the lunch and the morning tea when I'm not there is just as important. So they wander out of the room and go and talk to each other. And I don't know, I think a fair swag of what's beneficial in a compassion group happens in my absence. It's once the group gets going and they all have lunch together, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So now it's an open group, is that right? Or a closed?
Yes, it started actually as a closed group, but
right.
What was happening was that it was just too long, for people to get into the next cohort. So people would be discharged. They wanted to kind of get going straight away, and it would be, yeah, sure, I'll see you in 2 months, and that didn't go down very well. So and also, there is people's kind of mental health does come and go. So people would kind of they might need to be readmitted or something. So, kind of closed groups are lovely in the sense that you get the same people, but sort of dropout is a problem. And, you don't want to have to start too big at the beginning to, not everyone sort of copes with sort of really large sizes, but you don't want to lose your critical mass either. So it's somewhat got decided for me that we're going to do open groups, and I've just learned to embrace it now. Most weeks we'll have someone new joining the group, and there's an icebreaker process, and I try to mix the icebreaker kind of thing up. And I often tell people when they first land with us that to not really expect to get what we're speaking about in the first couple of sessions, right? So just to take the pressure off that, and others tell them the same thing, but that by sort of session 3 that they'll sort of feel more familiar, and then sort of just to take that weight off things.
Because there sort of like a certain number of actual sessions that then roll from there. How many sessions have you got?
Well, I took Paul's protocol, so Paul's group protocol, which is 12, but it's sort of session 1's really in his protocol largely around getting, introducing the group members and having everyone sort of kind of get used to each other. and session 12 is largely where to from here. Yeah, so
Yeah.
sort of 1 and 12 kind of a lot of it is hard to sort of do when you've got an open group, because that sort of thing never happens. But largely the 10 in the middle I've got. I've Russell Coltz's anger protocol, so the rage. So use that. People really find that helpful. And I guess by popular demand, people have done other therapies. So what they're interested in is applying what they know how to do already with a compassionate lens. So I've added, a ACT kind of day where we look at psychological flexibility from a compassionate perspective. There's an approach, another kind of resources approach, building, nurturing self, protective self, kind of wise spiritual self, these internal resources. So we have a day doing that. There's a lot of interest in parts work, and the multiplicity and compassion kind of really lends well to internal family systems. So we have an IFS day, and we have a focus on trauma. So we do a kind of adverse life events day where we look at how do you apply the CFT skills you've got when you might dissociate or you kind of experience any of the sort of triggers and so on. So people really like that.
Okay, so it's really sort of well, that's what I love about compassion focused therapy is bringing a compassion focus to perhaps other things that people are already doing or have learned about, or that sort of thing. Just a curiosity about the open group, because I've always done closed groups actually, and yet I can totally see the practical utility really of some sort, just having the open group. What have you collected stats on things like, how many sessions do people tend to come to, what sort of numbers are there in kind of each group? Does that fluctuate? Just the attendance and engagement with group. Any figures there?
It's a lot easier to have high numbers with an open group because you're not, as people get referred, they can start. It is a little bit terrifying because what you find, at least for me, I don't know, our current group, for example, has got 22 or 23 people enrolled, and most days we get somewhere between 12 and 14 people turning up, sort of around about that number. So it's just terrifying what would happen if they all turned up one day or none of them turned up one day. But you just have to roll with it.
Yes, yeah. What if the first session for someone is the trauma day, for example, or something like that? Like how do you, as opposed to perhaps the day where you're talking about, maybe body-based practices or safe place imagery or something. How do you manage the sort of the type of day that is the first for someone?
Can't. Yes. So they start wherever we are, and even with the trauma day, we're not going to ask people to suddenly go and recall things from when they were 5. We're just more working with the skill of, when a previous life experience kind of sets off your threat system, kind of how can you cope with that better? And or someone will arrive and it'll be kind of letter writing day, or it'll be the shame day. I don't know. People just arrive in the middle, and what often happens is they just sort of go with the flow, but they'll sort of lots of people go around more than once, right? They'll catch it the second time as well and go, oh, it just makes a lot more sense now, and I really get what's happening.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
But there is definitely a danger for people that they could get lost and feel confused all day, and we just normalize that and apologize and say, don't worry, you'll figure out we repeat ourselves very soon, right? Because there's sort of the same themes that you do over and over again.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I wondered about that too, whether there's a kind of, for example, some sort of definition of compassion gets mentioned every time, or the notion of 3 flows, or the notion of fears, or whatever it might be. Some of the kind of key bits of information from CFT, whether it just comes, it gets spoken about every session or something.
In the handout, that we'll have a specific handout for each week, but in the back is like a 2-page summary of the key compassion concepts, and a 1-page kind of resource, which is some resources specific to the topic, but also referring to, for example, Stan, your book, right?
Oh, yes.
Compassion. and James's and Paul's. Yes. But
yes.
so point them to all those resources, and also the Compassion Initiative, which I use a lot as a kind of as a call out to that. So and there are photos of you and Compassion in a t-shirt on a particular topic. So it's kind of, I line those resources up so they know when they go home, if it kind of was a bit confusing, there's other places they can go and digest this more slowly.
So it sounds like you've done a lot of group work. I mean, that's, amazing stuff. What would be then unique to running a CFT group, compared to other things? Is there anything there, or how, what's unique about perhaps utilizing a group in CFT? So, one way or the other.
Look, I think the ways of working with self-criticism and shame, and people really feeling like they're alone with their experiences, and coming to group. I'm a bit of I love using the whiteboard, so we'll really doesn't matter what the topic is, but I'll put everyone's name down the left-hand side, and get people to kind of reflect on or provide information on some, often about an experience, and sort of kind of what showed up for them, or might be sort of mapping a skill to a kind of a struggle. And just this sort of idea, I love ticking. So people would say, and also the same as what Sally said. And I'd say, that's great. I love ticking. So this common humanity of, yes, me too, right? And everyone's going, oh, me too. Yeah. So and seeing it on the whiteboard where they can see, for example, like we might do that, there's the conceptualization of CFT, which has got, those internal, external threats and unintended consequences and effect on self. So when you do that on a whiteboard with people, with an example where they're struggling with compassion, and people see, yes, we are sort of all different and our experiences are different somewhat, there's this incredible overlap, right, in terms of what we do and how our minds respond and the unintended consequences. And that in itself, when they look at it, is very, very kind of normalizing and healing. That I'm not broken, I'm not bad. All of us struggle with this.
Yeah. Brings everyone to the, it's not my fault, perhaps thing, and the common humanity seems to be the big kind of asset, I guess, of working in groups is you can really tap into the wisdom of the tricky brain and the it's not my fault. And actually on when it comes to FBRs, fears, blocks, resistances as well, in a way, it sounds like you almost were describing there, just formulating the FBRs and how people can sort of, oh yeah, me too, even with that.
Yes. And you get a chance to ask people how they work with them. So you'll hear other group members say, and when that happens for you, what do you do? Right. And so it's great when it's not coming out of your lips, when the wisdom of the group kind of gives the answer.
Do you use little self-disclosure anecdotes or little examples that way at all? With
totally.
fears, for example?
Yeah. So definitely share my own, within appropriate bounds, of course.
Yes.
But very clear that, we are all humans, right? Me included. And I'm not always compassionate. That I can struggle with that myself in certain contexts, and that that's something I'm working on. So people are always interested in and how are you trying to work with that? So you can see, once they know that you're kind of not different to anyone else, how do you do that, and how do you go with that?
Yes, the Compassionate Mind training course, it sort of encourages us as facilitators to give little examples, things that have happened in the week, again, in, appropriate boundaries and that sort of thing. But I think there's something very powerful in that common humanity with the therapist or facilitator as well. And in fact, I suspect that helps with things like the safeness in the group that we were talking about before, and managing those, sometimes that power differential and that sort of thing. So where to from here for you with all of this? I mean, it sounds like you're definitely, kind of moving along, and week after week you're running these groups, which is incredible. And it's hard work too, actually, for facilitators running groups. But what's exciting you about it all from here? CFT in groups.
Well, yeah, so there is sort of, to some degree, the usual kind of challenges. You were just saying not my fault before, but that's not the easiest concept for people to grasp and to believe. So I keep saying, but it is my fault. I did all those things, right? I deserve the suffering that I'm having now, sort of, and going round and round, coming back to that notion of it's distress in the moment that we're discussing, and non-judgment about it, and this sort of motivation to kind of shift the focus, the responsibility to be helpful. So I guess the basics of CFT remain challenging.
Yes.
It's every day, your last week is yesterday's fish and chip wrappings, right. It's over. So you've got to kind of rebuild the group that day and deal with kind of whatever the challenges are coming. But I guess the other thing that's really got me interested now is part of it sort of came out of this notion of self and kind of an internal family systems approach, which has kind of this concept of self. And I was really struck by Paul and Malcolm Huxter's and Choden's article this year, the April article, discussing sort of these evolution-informed approaches and kind of Buddhist approaches to compassion. And it's particularly where people have trouble shifting from, say, an anxious self or an angry self or a sad self or a grieving self or whatever the self is, to compassionate self. Right? So some people can do it easily, some people can do it easily enough in some contexts. But for many people, they really struggle to make that shift, from kind of a threat-based system to a kind of more compassionate sort of system. And I was really struck by how this is used in other approaches, and having kind of experienced that, wanted to bring some of that to compassion. So I guess this sort of non-duality, this sort of dissolving of self and other, that are present, that I've noticed now in Buddhist traditions, and also in, I guess this sort of, Paul was calling in the article sort of awareness of awareness, as a way to shift out of a neutral zone, like a safe place to shift into as you come out of the threat system into this place, and then to be able to shift into compassionate self. So it's something that's kind of exploring and trying to sneak it into the kind of the group work. So trying to extend some of the exercises with these ideas. So yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, sometimes I sort of kind of talk about pattern switching, and like it all sounds so sort of simple. Let's just shift the brain and body pattern from threat to compassion or whatever. But as you say, that's the $64 million question for people, isn't it? How to do that, how to make that shift. That's once they're able to sort of gradually, more readily move into the compassionate self, then that's a kind of an enormous amount of the work done, and being able to bring the compassionate self to all of the suffering. But it's tricky. I'll be very interested to hear where all of those thoughts gradually take you.
Yes.
In fact, I might even put the link to that article in the little show notes below as well, because that certainly might be of interest to others too.
Yeah, it's a great article. Yeah.
So just before we finish up, I often like to get some, maybe your 3 top tips or something like that, and maybe to do with running CFT in groups. I mean, I think that really is an area of great expertise and experience for you. What would you say might be 3 top tips for running CFT groups?
Well, I guess the interview you did with Alison Dixon back in May 2021 was really inspirational for me to, the wisdom of the group and getting the group to do the work. And in that sense, I often use a lot of pairs work in group work and get them to kind of pair a kind of a mildly challenging moment where they struggle to apply compassion, but something with a bit of bite in it but they can stay in the window of tolerance with the skill, right? And lots of practice of, the brief setup of a bit of soothing breathing, safe place imagery, kind of building compassion itself, and then now into pairs, and then come back and reflect. So that sort of across the day would be my sort of classic way of doing it, because then it's not you talking anymore, it's people giving it a go and learning off each other. So they'll watch how the other person does it, and then we come back to the group where they'll hear kind of how other people went with it and what fears, blocks and resistances turned up for them, or how they went about it, what successes they had. So I really kind of I really try to speak less and less delivery of content, and really just try and give the minimum amount to set something up. And I'll provide that, as reading or other things if they want to look at it, but getting them doing the work is the first thing. On a similar thing, kind of less thinky compassion and more feeling compassion. Yeah. So if you can get them to feel something around compassion, and then often pause and have them sit with that for a moment and notice kind of what's happening, right? So I know we've made a breakthrough when someone gets that first felt sense of it. That's gold. So really kind of aiming for that moment. And I guess this is almost sort of saying quite almost the same thing, but we were just talking about the shifting out of, threat-based selves into kind of compassionate self. So lots of that shifting across the day, practicing people sort of naturally end up back in their threat system again. And then this awareness of that, some brief practices to get them to shift, and then use of the skills in compassionate self. So trying to have that happen as many times across the day, right, is another thing I aim for. Because, you don't want to just have them come and do that once, because in real life, you've got to, the phone rings and you've got to be able to shift into compassionate self by the time you answer the phone. So, this is something you've got to kind of be able to do quickly. So lots of practices of that.
Okay, yeah, the taking advantage of the group with pair work or sort of interactional stuff amongst the group themselves, and the sharing of experiences and so on, really trying to create that felt sense, as they say, of compassion, and sort of managing Deborah Lee talks about the head heart lag type thing. People might know it, but it's that ability to really sort of feel it, or have an experiential sense of it, and then and then practice the sort of the shifting, the threat system, threat activation to compassionate self. I mean, as you say, there's all sorts of little micro moments across the day, isn't there, where we can where we might want to try to do that with the next phone call, or sort of the interaction at the shops, or something happens at home or at work, and all of a sudden we're wanting that practice behind us to be able to make the shift.
It's magic in those groups, Dan, when you kind of you say, all right, we might be doing shame. So think of a kind of moment where you kind of shame really turns up, and it makes it hard for you to kind of practice good self-kindness or be connected to others. And then because you've got the kind of the momentum of the group, all right, okay, so everyone's got one, and we make sure it's not too kind of whatever. Okay, all right, so plant your feet, we're going to do some soothing breathing now. So you could kind of get this ritual going where the whole group kind of knows we're about to work with this aversive experience. And you get them all sitting in pairs, and all right, so everyone close your eyes, fix on the spot, and you go through the ritual of it. And then they're into the pair work, and people just do it. It's amazing.
Yes. they sort of assume the position, sort of thing, feet flat on the floor, roll back the shoulders, boom, they're there. No, I love it. And that's that really is the beauty of even just, kind of repetition and practice, and, they learn about it and then they practice it. But, you can sort of see as they begin to just really embody it and bring it online.
Totally.
So thank you very much for being willing to have this chat. Where can people be in touch with you, I guess, if they're interested to know more or that sort of thing?
Yeah, probably best from our website. So
okay.
So www.gillogley.com. So I've sent you the link, Stan. You can
yes.
add that to the
yeah, good. I'll pop that down the bottom of the show notes, as they sometimes call it. But yeah, wonderful to see you. I look forward to catching up again soon, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan.